Get the camera lined up. I nudged it out of place when I hit record. It went all wonky. And I think the world of jazz, if it's going to be around in any reasonable shape or form and not just being supported by the rich and educated, wealthy elites, it needs to learn to get a bit wonky again, I think. Wonkiness is not a thing that is valued much in jazz, is it? If you're a jazz musician, on this video, I'm going to give you 10 albums that you should listen to. This video is going to be called 10 jazz albums that every jazz musician should listen to. We don't need jazz twice. 10 albums that every jazz musician should listen to. They're all fantastic albums, for one, but for two, each one, there's a lesson to be learned for a lot of musicians creating modern jazz at the moment. Well, it would be modern jazz if they're doing it right now, aren't they? It can't not be. I had a great conversation with the YouTuber Matthew Belisario about modern jazz, and I think for the first time I was, because I think it was a sort of an argument rather than just me doing a monologue, I was able to really voice my frustration about what is wrong with contemporary jazz on that video. I think I articulated it well. So here's a solution of sorts: is they should go and learn some lessons from each of these albums. I'm going to suggest jazz musicians you go and listen to, and if you don't like them, then I don't know what I can say about that. You should if you're a jazz musician, you should like this first album I've got here. It is the Hot Fives, the Hot Sevens by Louis Armstrong. Let's start at the beginning. Jazz was successful for a reason. It sold lots of records for a reason. It got popular for a reason. There's things in jazz that people love. They really love it, right? And then geniuses came in and they did it absolutely brilliantly. In terms of soloing, in terms of arrangements, in terms of the way the band operates, and all these things, the way that they operate in the recording studio and the sort of records they put out, if you're a jazz musician, you want to know why nobody really wants to listen, you've got to take a leaf out of Louis Armstrong's book, right? I realised, chatting with Matthew, that there are two areas where jazz, I think, needs to explore. It needs to explore the commercial end. It needs to make records that are popular, that people will like, and bring the audience in. And in that, it has to have incredibly great improvisation. This is why I don't have a problem with Kenny G. Yeah, his stuff is soporific. It's very easy listening to. He never stresses anybody out. But his actual soloing is of high quality. Right, is he doing what Louis Armstrong does on here? No way. Listen to Louis. Louis came in and utilised jazz in terms of his soloing instrumentally compared to a classical musician. He expanded the vocabulary. He could use noises, sounds, slurs, reveilles, weird arpeggios, jazz notes, the blues. He had an incredibly wide vocabulary of sounds. This has got lost in jazz, right? He would also arrange the tracks to feature the soloing in different contexts. So it wouldn't be the guy solos over the head, right, and then the next guy solos over the head. Louis Armstrong back in the mid-20s was changing the arrangement, so he might just drop down to bass and saxophone, then you might just get a piano solo within that. Arrangement's very important, but most importantly, and this is going to go through all this, he was singing songs, right? As soon as you're not singing songs, nobody wants to know. Okay, this is the biggest lesson that I can put across to jazz musicians. If you want to sell some records, start writing songs. Start writing songs. I will go through this on this video of why jazz became primarily instrumental. Right, and there was a time when it worked, like 70 years ago it worked. It doesn't work anymore. Right, it just does not work anymore. Nobody's interested. If you're, quite well off and you can support yourself doing your instrumental widdly jazz that no one cares about, then carry on doing that, and I will support you in doing that. And we need people doing that, actually. I think we actually do need people doing widdly jazz that nobody likes, and I will like it. But I want to create a bridge for people to get to your music. So some of you are going to have to start writing songs and considering the recording studio. Louis Armstrong's biggest breakthrough, as far as I was concerned, is he realised that an improvising jazz group could change their sound to utilise the technology at the time, which was recording in a room for a side of a 78 record. The Hot Fives and Hot Sevens are the Bible list. This is the most important recordings in the 20th century. This is where jazz starts. Listen to what he's doing. Listen to the humour. Listen to the sophistication in the writing. Listen to the way he utilises blues. Listen and learn from Louis, right? Stop stopping at the beboppers. Stop thinking that to be a jazz musician, you've got to be a bebop jazz musician. Louis Armstrong couldn't play bebop. Right? He's the greatest jazz musician of the 20th century, right? I know when you went to college, your lecturers made out that you've got to be able to play like a bebopper to be a jazz musician. If you can't, then you're not a jazz musician, right? That is not jazz. Bebop is not jazz. There's a reason why those beboppers created instrumental music that hardly anyone could understand, is because they were making a statement there about who they were. They were outsiders. This was a really punk attribute of bebop. And then everyone started to realise how hard it was. Charlie Parker was just naturally a genius. Everyone wants to sound like Charlie Parker. And this idea of emulation and the idea that you as a jazz musician wasn't about you jumping through the chord changes. It was about you having an individual voice. That when you bought Lester Young or Coleman Hawkins or Louis Armstrong or Harry James or Benny Goodman or Artie Shaw or whoever it was, you were buying their sound because you liked their sound, and you could make a decision. Oh, I really like Lester Young, but I don't like Coleman Hawkins. Johnny Hodges is great though. I love his playing. That's gone out of jazz because everyone sounds too samey, right? Go back to Louis. That's the fundamental. Always go back to Louis. Now, Louis was a great composer, but I think his great genius lay elsewhere. Jazz is about composition. Right, this isn't really an album, but it will do. The great Duke Ellington. This is my Duke Ellington album I grew up with listening to as a kid. Incredible. Go and listen to Mood Indigo. Go and listen to Mood Indigo. Right, there's no soloing on that. If there is, it's part of the composition, right? I could listen to Mood Indigo and have no improvisation on it. Jazz is not inherently about improvisation. I'm a massive champion of improvisation here, but composition is really, really important to jazz. Mood Indigo is absolutely beautiful. The arrangement of Duke Ellington's composition, if you just were to study the way those chords are voiced across that band, right, you will start to realise that it is written not just in terms of the arrangement of the chord structures, which are very important, incredibly important, but also which instruments are playing it, and then most importantly, how the composition utilises the individual sound of his instrumentalist to voice that chord. When he voices a C major chord, he decides to put a personality on the first, another personality on the third, and another personality on the fifth. Is that happening in jazz now? No. Because the individuality is not as important. And composition is not that important. There are great musicians composing stuff, and it's interesting stuff. But there's so many people, especially in the fusion era, it's really surprising this, that have ended up like, they write a beboppy head, get some sort of displaced, jumpy about drum beat. And I've been I was playing these jump around drum beats before anybody else was. Like 40 years ago, I was playing this stuff, and now everyone's playing it. And it's like you get that, and then you get the lining, and everyone plays that in unison, and then you solo over it. And that's what everyone does. So they're not thinking about how the improvisation locks into the composition and how that solo is having a compositional effect. There are people doing it. I'm not saying there isn't, but it's a really important thing for you to think about, okay? So that's my second album. Right, what have I got? Now I've got a run of all sorts of different albums. Those two were jazz albums. These aren't necessarily jazz albums, right? I feel a certain aspect has got lost from contemporary jazz. And I'm going to try and illustrate it with a couple of albums here. Right? First off, upsetting the apple cart, pushing the audience to a point where they're not comfortable, not playing the game, doing something that's challenging. We're talking about stuff that's really accessible. I've been talking about the stuff that's really accessible, but we need artists to push the envelope out more, right? For example, an album that you should go and listen to, if you want to see what I'm saying, is a jazz album. It's called Machine Gun, and it's by Peter Brotzman. Go and check that album out. Now, if you go onto YouTube now, you will check it out. It will be a lovely, cleaned up version of it. I have the incredibly expensive, ordered from Europe, which the free music production. This came out in 1990 on FMP, I think. And this cost me a ton of money, and it's a terrible transfer from a terrible recording. This is what everybody listened to back in the day. And this is distorted. This is the heaviest thing that exists in music. This is absolutely mind-blowingly terrifying as an album, right? As much as I think people should be building bridges into jazz, jazz should be unafraid to upset people. It shouldn't be trying to conform to what their lecturers they thought good, or their family, or their friends, or the jazz world. There's too much of that. There's too much self-regarding. There's too much narcissistic mirror gazing here. Do I look good? Am I playing the right notes? Is this the right sort of thing? Is this the right sound? Are we looking cool enough? No, take a leaf out of Peter Brotzman. Peter Brotzman in 1968, right? Like those people chucking stuff around in the Paris riots, which I'm not condoning at all. But the spirit of the age when this album came out was one of trying to be a challenge. The music is a challenge, and that it has a political context. So I'm not on about championing a bunch of whole, racial identity politics from 50, 60 years ago. I'm on about doing something where the actual establishment doesn't like it. The establishment in jazz is going to come and destroy you if you say anything that's out of line at the moment, right? Peter Brotzman would not have stood for it. And I don't think his son would have either. And this is an incredible album. His son, Casper Brotzman, is an incredible guitar player. If you imagine his dad, Peter Brotzman, but it's the Jimi Hendrix trio, this is what you have with Casper Brotzman. I love this album. It's called Home, and it's by his band Massacre. Casper Brotzman's Massacre, Home. This is incredible. This is it. Highly improvised music. It's explored aspects of free jazz, but also psychedelic rock, heavy metal. It's incredible. And the way this power trio is working, when I was teaching, there were guitarists there that were metal guitarists. These kids were metal guitarists, and they got involved in the screamy metal and the more extreme metal. And they liked stuff like Machine Gun by Peter Brotzman. They liked it just because they thought, well, here's another album that might upset my mum and dad. But as they started to understand the artistry of what they were doing, in other words, making noise on guitar and seeing the guitar as a noise-making instrument, they might discover stuff like Sonic Youth and things like this. At this point, I would say, go and listen to this Casper Brotzman Massacre album. And they go, what's it, a jazz album? I go, well, sort of, yeah. And these kids, when they heard this, realised with their feedback and distortion and the freedom that is encapsulated on this disc, that they could actually find a way for making improvised music that was perfectly allowable for them to play guitar, bass and drums, to improvise, to not worry about their chops or the jazz vocabulary, but to go into a room and record themselves. And I had this thing, I said, look, we got a recording studio here, you've got Bandcamp, go in there, set yourself up and improvise for an hour, record it and mix it, stick it up on Bandcamp. No one's going to listen to it, but it means you're getting product out there and you're expressing yourself. And so many musicians who did that were then, from having that starting block, and this is what jazz should be doing. It shouldn't be a door that you shut on young musicians. It should be a door that opens to young musicians, and they can walk in and find a way of expressing themselves on their instrument in a place and a world where that's valued. Now, there could be, if we had this and our education system was allowing young musicians to do that, that some genius might walk in at some point, this young genius at 16 years old with a guitar, and they might just come across something that actually informs jazz, and it informs jazz from within. It's not just a bunch of trendy jazz musicians going, let's borrow from hip hop and we'll be cool. I'm talking about the jazz itself, the improvisation itself, the nuclear reactor of people in a room playing and going beyond what they know, of saying, I don't know what I'm doing. Let's see what happens, and listening back. And you never know, it just might cross over. There might be suddenly an audience going, let's go and see this trio. What do they do? Nothing. They just turn up, go into the room, and they start playing, but it's wild, you know, and they find a way of reaching the audience with something which is challenging, exciting, and visceral, which is what this is. I love that album. Don't know if I've talked about it on the channel before, but I absolutely love it. Right. The last truly great, groundbreaking genius in jazz was probably Ornette Coleman. His artistic pronouncements were never taken on wholeheartedly by the jazz world that sort of went, oh, I don't know about it. He dealt with the problem I was just discussing about how young people get into jazz by putting his 9-year-old son, who didn't play drums, on drums and making an album with him. And people found that abhorrent in the jazz world, the fact that some kid would be playing like that. But Ornette Coleman wanted to react to something which was less cliched. He wanted to react to a drummer, but react to a less cliched drummer. Ornette Coleman, I feel, has actually become a very great drummer. Some of the albums he plays on, I feel that as a harmonic drummer, he's probably one of the few that really understands the sort of time which is exciting in Ornette Coleman's world of improvisation. Very hard thing to describe. The post-Ornette Coleman fusion bands, for example, his own Prime Time, or the work of Jamali Takuma, James Blood Ulmer, I found very inspiring as a young jazz musician, of just giving me the balls to do it and not worry about the fact that I couldn't play, you know, Now's the Time by Charlie Parker. An album that's an absolute masterpiece of that era that came out in 1985 is this one. Ronald Shannon Jackson's Decoding Society, an incredible band, right? An absolutely incredible band featuring Eric Persson on soprano and alto sax, Robin Eubanks on trombone, Akbar Ali on violin, Vernon Reed on guitar and guitar synth, Onajay Alan Gums on keyboards, Melvin Gibbons electric bass, Bruce Johnson electric bass, and then Ronald Shannon Jackson on drums. This is incredible. It opens up with the tune bebop. It's as these guys understand bebop, right? They take bebop and they play that head. They play bringing out the chaotic punkiness of bebop. And from there, Ronald Shannon Jackson explores this netherworld between jazz and jazz rock and heavy metal and free jazz and little bits of 80s pop music. It's an incredible album. It's got a statement on the back of this album, and I think it's the lyrics to one of the songs, because it's actually singing. And nobody sings in this band, but there's where you get this sort of mass vocal of the whole band singing this. Decode, unfold your life. Let go of social hype. A new life begins at night. Read all your dreams, key into the scene. But I think let go of social hype. That is the message I'm trying to get across on here. Produced by Bill Laswell. Absolutely sounds incredible. Ronald Shannon Jackson is one of my favourite drummers. He's an incendiary drummer. He backs up a soloist in a way that the Future guys don't normally do. And his approach to time is absolutely unique. There is a way of playing time that the free jazz musicians play, which is sophisticated. It's like, rather than seeing something as a strict pulse, you see it as a rolling, tumbling rhythm, like you've lost foot and you are falling down a hillside and flipping and somersaulting down, and you're going down and there's a rhythm to it. Oh, I can't stop. But it's that type of tumbling out of control rhythm, right? It's a rhythm where the drummer's not necessarily holding the rhythm down. They're responding to some other rhythm that exists somewhere else. And then within that, there is then a sort of multitude of ways of perceiving rhythm. There is a multitude of ways of perceiving rhythm. we see a lot of drummers nowadays, it's all metric modulation and displacement on time signatures. It's like become a cliche now. I don't want to hear it. I'm bored by it. But their playing is always grid-based. If you want to learn how to get away from the grid, listen to this guy. Now I'm sort of, people are realising I'm a YouTuber. People are checking out my drumming and they're saying, oh, Andy's got this sort of old-fashioned freewheeling fusion approach. Now what I've got is I just play time in different ways, and I don't stick to the grid. I don't stick to the grid. I can point to albums where I've stuck to the grid, and I can point to the albums where I'm so stuck to the grid because the producer then decided to use the computer to get me even more stuck to the grid. And we don't want any of that now, do we? Right, let's get really deep into this. This guy's a bloody genius. I don't feel like we've got these characters anymore in the jazz world. It's John Zorn. John Zorn is a jazz musician that seemed rooted right in the culture of the 1980s, 1990s. He reacted and responded to the stuff that was around him. There's so many incredible albums. I think a great place to start with John Zorn would be the debut album by Naked City, because he does so many different things on here. The lineup's incredible. John Zorn alto sax, Bill Frisell guitar, Wayne Horowitz keyboards, Fred Frith on bass, Joey Barron on drums, and Yamasuka Ai on vocals, right? Elements of free jazz, heavy metal, funk, country music, film music, and the track list, I'm going to find it difficult to read this, but we get things like the Johnny Mandel thing in I Want to Live. He does a version of Lonely Woman by Ornette Coleman, which is quite heavy. There's things like Demon Sanctuary and Punk China Doll. These are heavy tracks. He does the James Bond theme at one point. There is the sort of French, like that French song style with the tune Contempt by George Delerue. Snagglepuss, heavy stuff. What else have we got in here? He does the Sicilian Clan by Ennio Morricone. It's just full of so many wider reference points than just the jazz world itself. And when he goes outside to other forms, he doesn't then just play in that style to get a few sort of, social coolness points. He goes outside to bring that stuff in and drop it into the nuclear reactor of jazz. And his new nuclear reactor contains free jazz, which shifts it into all sorts of places. And it creates a world. This is a wonderful album. Wonderful album. What else shall we put up next? Right. Non-musicians improvise. Non-jazz musicians improvising. There is a whole world out of there of very creative musicians making improvised records that I believe are jazz albums, but will be discounted by the jazz audience. They are worth listening to because the references are different. An absolutely incredible album I've pulled out is on CMP Records, and it is called Polytown, and it features David Todd, Mick Karn, and Terry Bozzio. Now, Terry Bozzio is a jazz drummer, Tony Williams style drummer. He can play jazz. By this point, his drumming has moved so further forward, taking its lead really from Stravinsky and Varese, his ex-Zappa drummer, that he's not playing a drum kit at this point where you could play traditional jazz drums on it. Isn't that an incredible way to bust jazz open? Is to actually look at the instrument itself and put something in the works where you can't sit there doing a jazz ride. He can emulate it. But this drum kit he plays is designed to play ostinatos and melodic lines. Mick Karn, of course, is the late, great genius bass player that played in Japan. An incredible individualist on the bass, as we all know, going back to that Louis Armstrong thing, but not a trained jazz musician. In fact, not really a trained musician. In fact, he didn't even know what notes he was playing because he never tuned his bass to concert pitch. He would just tune his E to whatever he wanted it to be and then tune it from there and playing it that way. David Todd is a fantastic jazz musician, but he's also come through the line of that sort of progressive, ambient, Robert Fripp, Adrian Belew world of guitar. David Todd is one of the great guitar players, and here he is exploring ideas of ambience through the guitar. A lot of use of technology, a lot of use of the instrument to create different sounds and then to work within that genre. This is a great album. There's a lesson to be learnt there. Think about the sounds you're making. Why do we have to hear electric bass, double bass, little drum kit, all the drums are tuned the same? Why have we got to keep hearing the same sounds over and over again? Of course, you'll say so-and-so's doing this. I'm championing those artists. It's like I'm not saying this isn't going on. I'm on about a general trend, right? Let's move on to this. Next thing is we do have modern recording studios now, digital audio workstations. All these albums are being made on those, but they're not utilising the technology. If they do utilise the technology, they usually utilise it from pop music or hip-hop and destroy the jazz. If you want to hear a jazz album that is just birthed out of modern technology or digital audio technology, because this album is probably, bloody hell, it's 27 years old now, this is. Music is Rotted One Note by Square Pusher. This is a dark, funky album, like a drum and bass bitches brew. There's real drums in there, there's real bass playing in there, there's real instrumentation, but there's a whole bunch of manipulation through, you know, effects, electronics, different studio techniques. You can see here that there's something on the front going on, quite strange, as they got this speaker wired up to this plastic plate with a microphone up against it, with the words, music is rotted one note, and then the list of the, this is an incredible album. Square Pushers is a genius. He's done all sorts of different albums. His early albums like Feed Me Weird Things and Music is Rotted One Note took drum and bass techniques and took them into outer space, but he is a great player, great bass player. Here he sort of takes on the idea of improvisation and jazz. This is just a monumental. I'm going to put that in the car. I love it. Right, so 2 modern albums now, and then we're done. We've done the list. That's right, coming up to half an hour, trying to do half-hour videos at the moment. So, heavy metal. I started off by loving heavy metal, okay? I then learned to play by studying metal musicians. And somehow, heavy metal opened the door to me towards jazz. And so many jazz musicians I've met have said exactly the same thing. You know, like Rush plays a part for me, for my mate B.D. Lenz, American jazz guitarist, and for Brad Meldau to get to jazz. Heavy metal has something about it which relates to jazz, okay? Now, if we check out the modern metal musicians that are out there, they are not doing what the jazz musicians are doing. And I have to be honest, I had a number of years when I was critical of modern metal drummers. The reason was because I found it such a challenge. People play blast beats, really fast double bass drums, you know, noise, all this stuff that they're doing. Virtuoso as it is, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And it's like, it seemed so alien to me. And instrumentally, I was bamboozled and bemused by it. Really was. So I was going to listen to the jazz guys that have come up and taken sort of that J Dilla hip hop sound, put it onto the drum kit. And I thought that's where the cool drums were. And I think the jazz world thinks that. I think the metal drummers are doing something far more outlandish. And I think jazz drummers need to listen to the metal drummers, right? The instrumentalists need to listen to what these guys are doing on guitar and bass. You've got to listen to I think that the one instrumental music that is still around and loads of kids are listening to is metal. Now, yeah, it gets ruined sometimes by digital audio workstations, and I've done whole videos about that. But it's interesting to open yourself up to this stuff. Last summer, I decided to take the bull by the horns, and I went on a 3 or 4 month program to get my bass drum fast, because they were reasonably fast, but they were jazz rock fusion fast, you know. They were Billy Cobham fast. They weren't metal fast. And it took me a long time to be able to access the way to play them. And the thing is, what's interesting is a lot of the techniques on drums that you utilize for playing fast jazz, swing, and the lightness, that is being utilized by modern extreme metal drummers, right? It's very interesting. So I wanted to put forth a metal album for jazz musicians to listen to. Now I'm going to put this one forth because it's not completely just screaming metal all over the place, but it's got elements of that. It's Avenged Sevenfold's most recent album, Life is But a Dream. This is a jazz album, but listen instrumentally what's going on, listen compositionally what's going on, listen to the sophistication of the musicians, learn something from the way they play and how they approach it. It's got Brooks Wackerman on drums, who's the younger brother of Chad Wackerman. This guy's doing interesting stuff on the drums, as are most modern metal drummers. Drum parts that don't seem to conform to a normal way of playing, you know, they're parts that go with the tune. As this album develops, they move away from the metal genre and they sort of take it and open it out, and it ends, I won't tell you where it ends on the last track, Life Is But a Dream, but the way it is programmed is then all this virtuosity and weirdness and genre shifting and all the stuff that's going on in this isn't there just to be weird. This is about reality, and it takes you to a point. By the end of the album, if you sit and listen to it one sitting, you are quite disorientated. This instrumentally, musically, is far more interesting than most of the jazz albums I've ever heard. So go and listen to it. Let's pull all this together then. How do you, in the modern age, how would you pull all this, modern technology, digital audio works, station techniques, trying to solo in your own voice, bringing song elements in, being avant-garde, but also being accessible. I think this is embodied by a genius modern musician, but is the jazz world going to accept him as a jazz musician? Right? This album here does everything. And the key, again, is the compositions. Plus, this guy has been able to integrate this into the internet, and he doesn't survive by touring and releasing. I think he probably does now, because through the internet, he's been able to build up a profile that allows him to tour the world now. But in the early days, he made his name online. That, of course, is Lewis Cole, who is works under his own name and also works under the band name Noah. I think last year he finally brought out his masterpiece, which is this one, Nothing, made with an orchestra. It's all about the composition. This is just an incredible album. And some of the soloing, I don't know what it is. When it comes to modern soloing, I find Lewis Cole's soloists seem to be blighted with a lot of the afflictions of modern jazz soloists. You can tell they've come from jazz college and they're playing in the same way. But even with that, Lewis Cole's drops them into the context of his songs. And he almost utilises their virtuosity in an ironic way. I have to say, some of the soloists on here, we do get to a point now with modern jazz where people are just blurring fast 16th notes without stopping. So what are you doing? Take a breath at least. So I do have that issue with some of the solos. It's strong stuff, and when it's flying, sometimes you want it to do that, don't you? You want it to do that, but yeah. They're my 10 albums, half an hour, nailed, done. Thanks for watching this video. If you like these videos, I will try and do 1 or 2 a week where I talk about maybe albums you haven't heard, music you haven't heard, get into the more esoteric aspects of jazz and prog. Prog audience, you should check these albums out. You really should, because progressive rock musicians have always flirted with jazz. Here in the UK, our jazz scene was, in the 70s and 80s, progressive scene. Bands like Soft Machine were basically just jazz groups. It's really interesting how that was integrated in. The great soloists we've produced, like John McLaughlin and Alan Holdsworth, came out of the progressive scene in a way that they did, especially Holdsworth. And a lot of people who were saying, well, the London jazz scene at the moment is very creative. And it is. The UK at the moment is one of the hot spots in the world. And I'm going to try and cover that. Even though it's a hot spot and everyone's saying how great it is, no one's listening to it. And if you wonder why I'm not doing videos on it, why I'm not inviting these British jazz musicians to come here into the studio and to perform and get a wider audience, is because I've been shut out of the UK jazz world aggressively over and over again. I don't belong to it, and after years of it, you can tell I've got a bit sort of miffed about that. So they don't come and ask me about it. They don't watch this channel. They don't see my channel as playing any part in the jazz world, even though my audience, jazz audience here, is greater than theirs. But they don't come my way, do they? They don't want to know, because they're up their own arse in their own little bubble. That's the problem with the jazz world. They're all elitists. They're all snotty. They want to tell you what jazz is, what it isn't, and it's all about, looking like you're doing the jazz thing, which the whole rest of the world hates. And I'm going to push this, But the other thing is, if I was to bring in some of the cutting edge musicians in the UK at the moment, and I got them in here and I went through all the trouble of, filming them and recording them, put aside, my video on the, the 10 greatest musicians who've lost a limb, that one that I've been working on, where I just have to sit the camera and go through a list, crack a few jokes, tell you some facts, point you to some interesting music, and bring it all together under the banner of the loss of limbs. You all want to see that. You don't want to see some jazz musicians from the UK you've never heard. They've got no audience. When are they just going to bloody meekify, if that's the word, when are they going to meek up, get a bit meek and go, what do we do? Andy, what do we do then? Oh, you're asking me now, are you? You're asking me now, here, with my YouTube, with my audience. I could bring jazz musicians in tomorrow, and